born in Shanghai, and my parents came here when they were 26, and I was 8 months old. I was like less than a year old.
And came to the California.
Came to California, yeah. We first landed in LA, in Inglewood, and then we sort of like moved around the suburbs, San Gabriel Valley, and then when I was 7, we ended up in Irvine, and that's where I was until college.
Okay. So what brought them from Shanghai? What brought your parents from Shanghai to California?
To California, I think just community. There were some people who were here that it was, kind of like out of the Cultural Revolution, post Mao China, and everyone was sort of leaving if they had the chance. And I don't remember the specifics now, but I think my dad could like pull a couple strings, and he came here, more generally to immigrate, but also because he was coming here for a computer science MA.
Okay. Okay. So you are then raised mostly in Orange County.
Mostly in Orange County, yeah.
How was that?
Yeah, LA and Orange County. Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, so it's a master plan city,
It's beautiful. It's got
owned by a developer.
right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I have things to say about this as somebody who lives in Los Angeles, which is not master planned.
Yes.
Like there's something about Irvine that's a little bit creepy because it's so like sanitized and planned and organized and manicured. And yet coming from the chaos of Los Angeles, I often find myself appreciating it. I'm like, look at these bike paths. Look at these trees. Like it's,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a double-edged sword. I mean, I didn't really know growing up why things felt so hygienic and sanitized. And actually, I'm working on a new manuscript that's based loosely on the Irvine Company, which is the company that now owns, not just Irvine, but they also do like real estate in other places, hospitality. They're like just this big conglomerate now. So I was researching a lot of like how the master planning of Irvine came about. And it was like James Irvine, which was an Irish immigrant family. And this land used to be just like cattle grazing, agriculture. And then it wasn't really incorporated until the University of California wanted to build UCI there. And so they sold the land to the University of California for $1 and hired a master planner in. And yeah, made this whole plan for a city. And originally they wanted it to be pendant layout where they wanted the university to be at the center and all these villages, which are essentially neighborhoods, like fanning out from it. But then something was weird with the terrain. So they made it more of a pendant where you have UCI at the bottom of this necklace and then this oval shape where all the neighborhoods radiate out and 2 man-made lakes at the center. So it's like very, very thought out. Yeah, my experience of it was just like every blade of grass was exactly 90 degrees out of the earth. No billboards. Like they have all these rules about how things should look. I think Forbes named it like 4th safest city in America at one point. So it was really, really idyllic, but it was also really, really bleached. Like I didn't realize until I left Irvine and like traveled more that like, oh, not every establishment needs to be a chain. Like I don't think an independent store exists in Irvine. I'm like hard pressed to think of one. So it was really like growing up in a shopping mall.
Yeah. And it's beautiful. And like you say, that's a weird like juxtaposition of characteristics. Like on the one hand, no billboards. On the other hand, nothing but chain stores.
Yeah.
So it's like they have certain aesthetic things that I'm like, oh, that's cool. And like I like the bike paths and it is pretty to have all these trees here and it is livable, but it makes me feel a little creeped out because of how perfect it is, or something like that.
Right. Yeah, it's like you don't have to think about any other choices because we've already made the best choice for you. There's something sinister about that.
So you grew up like what? Going to the mall, going to the movies. You must have, right? The Irvine. What do they call that big movie plex out there?
The Irvine Spectrum.
The Irvine Spectrum, right? Yes.
Which has only ballooned in my time away. I went back to Irvine for the first time in like 10 years because my parents now live in San Jose recently, and I went to the Spectrum, and it's even bigger.
You
It's
could,
like very faux Moroccan architecture, giant fountains.
is there a bookstore? You could do a reading at the Spectrum. It'll be full circle.
I actually don't know if there's a bookstore.
I doubt it.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
it's wild. I went to the Spectrum a lot. Um, I got caught shoplifting at the Urban Outfitters at the Irvine Spectrum. That's ingrained in my
rite of passage.
right. You got to do that.
What did you steal?
I th- I think I stole like accessories. It was like a belt maybe or sunglasses. Things that usually, I had like a little shoplifting spree in high school. And I was like, oh, these things don't have security tags on them the way that like clothes do. So it'd be like, earrings, little things like that from stores like Forever 21 or Urban Outfitters. And yeah, it went off when I exited, and I
What,
was
the
trying
security
to.
alarm?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It went off. I was with my best friend at the time, and I know, yeah, I just like try to invoke my rights or something. Where this manager was like, "We need to look inside your bag," and I was like, "No." And she was like, "Well, then we're gonna call the police." And then I was like, "Okay, you can have my stuff back." Yeah, so I went to the Spectra. We sat in a lot of parking lots. Like we would just get in the car and just like sit in the car because everything closed at like 9 p.m.
Which is another feature of Southern California life. This is not a late night culture in Southern, even in Los Angeles. I mean, I guess if you really want to stay out late, there are probably places you can find, but it's not like New York where it's like 24/7. You can always, like LA,
No,
people go to bed.
yeah, LA people go to bed, but in the Bay, people really go to bed. I was also recently there, and I remember it was like 9 p.m. on a Friday, and I was just in a lift, going from place to place, and there was just like no one on the streets. I mean, the pandemic, I feel like also did something, but I mean, I've moved to New York from Oakland 2 years ago, so the difference is striking. I mean, New York just, it truly like things end at 4 a.m. and then someone's like, okay, let's go to the afters.
Right. Or let's get brunch, whatever.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about your upbringing a little bit more, but in particular as it relates to your book, because I think your book reflects your upbringing and reflects some of the relationships in your family. And, we talked about the fact that your parents brought you here, like you guys all moved here from Shanghai,
Mm-hmm.
and your mother speaks Mandarin,
Mm-hmm.
and you were assimilated speaking English, and you don't speak great Mandarin. I think you say you have like picture book level Mandarin, I think I read somewhere.
Yes.
So this is interesting to me, and this is also reflected in the book, is, Kathleen and her mother, they can communicate. Her mother in the book actually speaks passable English, but it's not
Mm-hmm.
like super fluent. You, on the other hand, speaking picture book Mandarin and your mother not speaking English, you guys have a language barrier within your own family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kathleen and Marissa are, that aspect is absolutely based on my own experience. And I gave them both a little bit more fluency in each other's respective first main languages. Just because I wanted them to at least, that part I didn't want to grapple with as much as like all the other factors of them growing up in different places and having different cultural understandings. But yes, in my own life, I would say, my Mandarin is on the level of I can say I've eaten, and I can say I'm going to the park, but I can't really talk about anything complex or adult. So it sort of feels like I'm limited, even though I'm like thinking, I'm in my body and I'm in my own intellect. But when I hear myself expressing myself, it sounds like I'm 5. And same for my mom. And in terms of English, although I would say she's better than a 5-year-old, but it's hard for her, and I can tell when she's trying to speak English with me or with other people that she's struggling. And so there's not just like the level of I can't say fully what I mean, but even thinking of and attempting to do it is so much labor, and it's just exhausting. It's exhausting to do that all the time. And we'll sort of like when we communicate, my mother and I will sort of do a mixture where we're trying to meet each other where we're at. I try to speak more Mandarin. And so she'll answer in Mandarin. And I think part of that also is just like this is a language that we don't want to lose completely. So it's a little bit weighted in terms of like her being a little bit more able to express herself. But yeah, it's been tough, especially as I've gotten older and as I was sort of diverging from the life path that they'd imagined for me, and I started having to really defend myself
Wait,
and
wait, wait.
have.
What did they imagine for you?
Oh, I mean, I think what they wanted was whatever was available and easiest. So, my specific circumstance of living in California, going to Berkeley, coming out of college right after the Great Recession and during the tech boom, all of their friends who had kids in our same circumstance went into tech or, just did something, almost stereotypically what you think would be a safe career path. Computer science or law or something related to STEM. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to study English, and then I got my MFA in creative writing, and I didn't really know how that would translate into a financially stable career, but I also couldn't imagine pivoting to do something else. So that was a big point of contention.
I bet, and I feel like it's. I mean, I commend you for having. I mean, I relate to it. I commend you, especially since you seem to be making it work. It's ballsy, and it's not super typical, I think, for like a first generation child to like break out like that. Usually because it's like I've talked to people on this show over and over again who have that experience, and there's like such a concern about just being able to make it and survive that the safer path is sometimes sort of hewn to because it's too scary otherwise. But you had the courage to say, this is not who I am. I'm going to do an English degree and get my MFA at Johns Hopkins. Is that right? So that's a bold choice, and they ultimately supported you, or at least like they let you do it, right? I mean,
Right. Well, it's also like, what do I was like very jokingly, I used to say to my friends, like, what are they going to do? Fire me? Like,
right, right.
I'm their only child. We're an immigrant family. We've been through, so much to be here together. And, that was also, I think, a part of our dynamic too. Like the fact that I was an only child. My mom used to say, like, if there are other people in the family, like you could just go off and do your own thing. But she felt there's like this like responsibility of lineage or something of like, like we did all this specifically so just you could prosper. And maybe if I had siblings, like they could be, they could hew to that image, and then I could be the weird one. Yeah.
But here you are. You're the only, and you're the weird one. So it is what it is, right?
Yeah, it's
Do you?
really funny too. Sorry, yeah, it's really funny too because like it seems so mundane and like such a trope. It felt dumb to be like, oh, I'm fighting against my parents because I'm not doing what they want. And I was really frustrated by them, and I was like very cruel in my like own mental framing of them. I was like, oh, they're like only obsessed with this one, metric of success and happiness, and they're not really able to see beyond that. And it's only as I've grown up and part of the research of writing the book and just getting to understand where they grew up better that I realized that, it goes so much deeper than that. There's so much trauma from them. And, when they were trying to choose their career and life path, it was like you had one test, how in China you take one test one time, and if you don't make the grade, your entire life is effed up and you don't get a second chance. So there's this intense pressure, and how you choose your career, what opportunities you get are like totally backdoor, like connection that's really unjust, or the government will just somehow funnel you into something and you don't really have a choice. Yeah, and they struggled with rations and getting food and opportunity. So all of that, which they didn't really tell me about, That was all brewing in their heads. And so it took me a long time to understand, like, their concern comes from, yeah.
Well, and also, I
That's
mean,
great.
there's if the story in the book is similar to your own personal story, there are these traumas and circumstances that your parents endured that you maybe didn't know about, but it goes even deeper than that, like the ancestry, like grandparents, like these stories kind of come to you in bits and pieces, right? It's not like it was all laid out in a book for you. You sort of had to pick this stuff up, and it maybe brings the way that your parents raised you and maybe some of the things that they were trying to kind of push you towards. It might bring those things into better focus.
Right. It's, you get little fragments, and it's always like an offhand thing. And you're like, wait, what? My
Yeah,
great
right.
aunt was tarred for being a landlord's daughter and made to sit in the sun until she killed herself. Like, I'm what, 30, and I've just learned this. It's wild. And
So
that is like,
wait. She was tarred. So that means like covered in black tar? Like,
she was covered in black tar because she was a landlord's daughter, which made her bourgeois, and yeah, tortured until she killed herself. This is
jeez.
my dad's aunt. Yeah.
Was that
Or
something that was common? Like, I've never even heard of that.
yeah, and what's really funny is, well, maybe not funny, but I put that tidbit in an essay I wrote for The Atlantic about how I wrote this book a little bit as a love letter to my mother, and she won't be able to read it, and talking about all the ways that I've learned about my family in writing the book and learning to love them better or differently. And I put that tidbit in the book, and I also put something that I discovered about my grandma and her affair. And my dad was objecting to the personal story about my grandma, and like the thing about the tarring was like very blasé. Like, he felt like it was shocking that I would share something personal about our family like that with the public, but like these atrocities where he was like, yeah, that's very normal. And it's like, yeah, so it's just really funny, like, what is considered, I guess, what's been desensitized and what still feels very fraught for them to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is interesting how people process stuff. And, I read that piece that you wrote in The Atlantic, and there is something very poignant about having written this novel, which is in essence a love letter to your family and to your parents, and that your mom can't read it,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And you can't, I guess, unless it gets translated into Mandarin. You got to push for the Mandarin translation somehow.
Part of me is a little scared because, like, ooh, this is going to be very revealing. I mean, as heartbreaking as it is, and how much I would love for them to be able to read it, there is also a layer of, like, there's a buffer.
I was going to say that actually, upon further review, maybe it's great that they can't read it. You can just be like, yeah, I can say whatever I want.
Yeah.
Show them the good reviews, just be like, everything's fine. It's all good, because there is a complication that comes, especially when you're writing a story that's based on personal stuff and you're sort of, you're mining your own life and maybe your own family history for the story that you're building. There can be complicating issues, with that
Yeah.
stuff.
It gets into sticky territory, and there's just, yeah, there's also a level of visibility that's still a little bit scary. Just because our relationship, I mean, this is probably universal of parent-child relationships, but like there's, an idea of who they are, and there's something scary about like all of a sudden ripping that off, especially to your parents, of like, here's my raw brain.
Right, right.
Especially because, again, I think it'd be different if we, communicated on that level our whole lives, but like our communication is still very much limited. So I think in a sense our understandings of each other as whole human beings is necessarily still limited too. Like, I just don't really know maybe even their sense of humor as deeply as other people do, or the way they think, because there's always that truncation of how do I express this. So yeah, being if they were able to like dive into the book that way, it'd be a little bit scary.
So interesting to me, this upbringing of yours in Orange County as an only child of parents with whom there is this language divide and this cultural divide, because they came here as as adults. You came here as an 8-month-old. So you're essentially an American. And this is the culture that you know. And your friendships, and you're so language driven. I can tell just by, I mean, obviously you wrote a book, so you have a tendency toward this. But just talking to you, you seem like extroverted, and you seem, I don't know, like somebody who's a good hang. You like to talk. You must have had really tight friendships. If you couldn't be at home with a sibling and you couldn't really talk to your folks, you had to be talking to somebody is the point. Right? Do you have a dog?
I did get a dog, but only in senior year. Yeah. I think actually I don't think I had a lot of friends. At least for a good while, until maybe like middle school, high school. Like elementary school, I remember most of my afternoons were like I would come home from school and like read a whole book. Like I would just like flop on the carpet and just read an entire book and then eat dinner. Or it's like I would play board games against myself. Like I would play chess and I would like really try to beat myself. Yeah, but then I don't know, something happened in like middle school or high school. Maybe I don't know, with social life just gets to be a little bit more interesting and more sophisticated where yeah, I really did start finding my people.
You're like, bye mom, I'm going to the Irvine Spectrum to shoplift with my friends.
God. Yeah.
Wow.
Yes,
well,
exactly.
Do you have any, I mean, I know you've sort of got a limited understanding of your ancestry. You've kind of got it in bits and pieces, but do you have any sense of where your writerly tendency comes from? Like, are either of your parents literary or like good storytellers or anything? Do you have any sense of that? Or do you have any sense of maybe aunts, uncles, grandparents, like from whom you might get this gift?
I don't know. I don't think so. I know my dad's, and again, it's so funny because like I can't read it, but I know that he'll send these like long missiles through WeChat to people about like what we've been up to. They're sort of just, it's like a social media update, and I get the sense that those are really well written. And so he has like a storytelling bent, but neither of them are really literary, I would say. That was also sort of like stomped out during post-Mao and like not being able to get books. I remember like they were all contraband, so like they didn't really grow up with that. And I was not really close to my grandparents. But I do think a lot of it has to just come from like assimilation. Because like, I say now my Mandarin is really poor, but up until I went to kindergarten, like my first day of kindergarten, I only spoke Mandarin. And so being thrown into this new environment, I really felt like I had to like understand the language. I mean, I had to understand the language just to understand what was going on. And that became like really, I became really hungry for language. So I read a lot. I wrote a lot. I felt imperative. And then I think in like trying to keep up or like trying to be American or whatever it was, then I realized like, oh, this is really cool and really fun. And I love not just like the practical aspects of this, but like how transportive it is.
Yeah, that makes some sense. That hunger, for connection and for assimilation, and how you might have like an extra drive or something when it comes to language. Like, I guess that's another way that it can happen. I'm thinking of like Ingrid Rojas Contreras I talked to on this show, and English is her second language, but she writes beautifully in it. And I think came to it relatively late. Like, I mean, she grew up in Colombia, I want to say.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just amazing to me is the
that's
point.
wild.
Yeah, that people can like grab onto a language even later in life and like master it like that and then write in it. It's like I can barely write in it and it's my native tongue. So it's wild.
Tough.
I want to ask about something else related to your childhood that I think I read about. Well, I mean, it shows up in your book, but not in a one-for-one way. But I want to say I read in that Atlantic essay maybe that you went to Vegas for Christmas a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And you noted that there were lots of immigrant families in Las Vegas around Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
Never occurred to me that this would be the case, but it is. And can you just talk a little bit about that experience as like a kind of an annual tradition? You go to, because I'm assuming, I don't know, like from Shanghai, you're probably not like Christian in the American sense. You don't
No,
observe these holidays. So it's sort of like being a Jewish person going out for Chinese food on Christmas, right? Like you're just like, what are we going to
totally.
do? Yeah, everything's closed. Let's go to Vegas.
Yeah, I mean, essentially.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, it was the holidays, and my parents were like, I don't know, a little bit ambivalent about like how much to lean into Christmas. I loved Christmas, and I still love Christmas. Um, it just, I don't know what it is. I mean, I don't need to explain why Christmas is fun. I mean, it's
As an aesthetic thing, and also as a kid, it's like, yeah, I want presents and a tree with lights on it in my house. I mean, it's like,
yeah, it's magical. And so, I mean, they would do things like buy cookies for me to leave out for Santa, but they didn't think through like, oh, we should like eat the cookie. So I would also just come down in the morning, eat the cookie myself. And so it was like, I don't know, there was like some logic there that wasn't working, but like it was more about the ritual than the actual magic of it. Anyway, so we were, big on Christmas in some ways, but not in like any sort of like Santa is real or like Christian way. It was more just like, oh, look at this like fun thing that America does, and it's really like festive and great. And so, but yeah, but we didn't have any family in the States. It's just me and my parents. So, and my mom, is someone who like craves family. She always said she wanted 8 kids, and her idea of her life was like, running around the country with all these like, cousins around and aunts, and but that's just like not how it shook out. And so she's always kind of like loved city life too. I mean, especially coming from Shanghai. And so we would find like, the what's a place that's we could go to so to get out of our dreary 3-person house for Christmas, that's festive and like relatively cheap, and that was Vegas in the 90s. And living in Irvine, it was maybe a 4-hour drive. And yeah, and so there's like this like very commodified version of Christmas in Vegas where every hotel has a tree, and there's all these fake gifts wrapped up, and there's like fake Santas standing on the strip sort of like looking haggard. And it was just like this like weird circus version of Christmas that I loved, again because I was a kid. And also Vegas in the 90s was very much still family oriented. Like you had Excalibur, you had Circus with all the free circus shows on the hour. You had the Mirage with like a lava show. You had Treasure Island with a pirate show in the front, fake moat. So it was like very much like a family, like kid friendly place in a weird way, even though there were,
has that changed? Has that changed?
yeah, it's a lot sleeker now. It's a lot more like adult playground. Um, it feels a little
It
bit more,
should have always been
yeah.
an adult playground. I mean, like let's not mean making Vegas into a family place is a little bit absurd.
Yes. Yeah. But I loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, when you would see just so many Asian families around Christmas time in Vegas.
Damn, now I want to go. I've actually been because I got to say I liked Vegas when I was like 18, 19. I'd go on road trips with my friends and we'd be like this is, because anything goes. That kind of like when you're a certain age that's fun. But now I'm like, ew, what happened in this hotel room? Something bad happened in this hotel room. I don't feel clean. Like it's just,
Yeah, you could
you
just
know,
tell.
yeah, it's just like, and then like all the dinging of the slot machines and people losing all their money. I'm just like, this is weird. But
Yeah.
I think my kids would actually get a kick out of it. And I sort of want them to see Vegas. I feel like Vegas is something one should at least see as an American. It is a quintessentially American place, right?
It's so American. It's so fun, but then if you like poke at it even a little bit, it's so dark.
Yes, yes. It's like, yeah, it's just like the greed and capitalist, impulse, like just on steroids, like taken to like its maximal degree, right? It's like a temple to that impulse. At least the Strip is. I know Vegas contains more
Right,
than
right.
that now. It's become like a complex city. It's not just this strip in the desert anymore. But that's interesting to me. I didn't realize. I think I never really. I've thought of Vegas on New Year's as like a place you go to like,
Hmm.
have a big party and ring in the New Year. But I have never considered Las Vegas on Christmas.
Yeah. And I think it's also cheaper then too. So like that was an element of like if you want to go, this is the off season.
Maybe I'll take my kids there. Like, because you know what a cheap time to travel is? It's like the week before Christmas. Like kind of that mid-December, like it's sort of like, it's kind of this like dead zone. That's usually a good week to get out. If my kids are out of school, like drive out there for a couple nights and just be like, kids, like, this is your future. They would love
It's
it. They would love
fun.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah, of
there's a
course.
lot. There's like, I don't know, now there's like the Meow Wolf installation out there. Do you know Meow
What?
Wolf?
No, what is that?
I think they might be canceled, so I shouldn't be plugging them, but it'd be fun for kids. They do like these immersive art experiences, if that makes sense. So the one in Vegas, it looks like a grocery store, and you walk in, it looks just like a grocery store, but every product is super weird, and they've like manufactured all of them. So it's like a cereal box, but it has spiders in it, and like it advertises that on the cereal box, and then you can open a freezer door, and there's a tunnel, and it takes you to like a whole alien landscape. So it's sort of like combination art experience theme park slash like museum of ice cream Instagram bait.
Wow. How do you spell this? Why am I not aware of this?
It's Meow Wolf. I think they started in Santa Fe.
All right.
But I think there was a scandal with the creator. He might be bad.
Ugh. Can we still enjoy Meow Wolf?
But most people are bad. So
I mean,
most
we
people
all.
who are in charge of creating the things we consume at some level, it's coming from someone very rich.
Well, I want to talk too about professional cuddling. I mean, you can't talk about this book without talking about this, and about this issue of touch in general. I mean, the book is called Holding Pattern, and I think the word holding, there's a double entendre happening there. And, the title Holding Pattern is referring not only to Kathleen's sense of herself over the course of the story as she's sort of like, should I go back to graduate school? This guy broke up with her. She's not in a relationship. She's trying to sort that out. She's kind of at that place in her young adulthood where you're just trying to figure shit out, And she ends up cuddling professionally. Like she cuddles people. And I had a conversation about this. I think it was Melissa Phoebos.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Right.
want to
And she
say I
had that
talked to her.
piece.
She had a piece where she went to a cuddle party, right? It was
Yes.
she was not professional. She wasn't doing it as a professional cuddler. She kind of went to experience what a cuddle party is like, where you just show up and they're strangers and everybody just cuddles each other. Which I got to say, personally, temperamentally, I don't think I could do it. Maybe I could. Maybe it would surprise me. I think I'm open, I guess, but like, man, that seems strange to me. And to do it professionally, especially as a woman, and to have mostly men, let's be real, right? This is mostly men coming to cuddle with women professional cuddlers.
Mm-hmm.
That's usually how it goes down. There's not a lot of women coming to be cuddled, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I would say of the hundreds of, messages I've gotten, only one has been from a woman.
Yeah.
And she, disappeared. She ghosted. I don't know what happened. So I've never actually cuddled a woman unless I was paying her to do so, which I did as research at the beginning of the book.
And yet, it should be noted that and correct me if I'm wrong, the overwhelming majority of these cuddle sessions are benign. They're not, like they can actually be like unexpectedly or strangely moving and, right? I mean, there's a real human transfer that happens that's very vital. And I get that. And I think this book feels, as so many books that I'm talking about on this show right now, they feel like they are tinged with our experiences of the pandemic. Like a book that is about touch, that was probably written at least partially in a time in which we were so removed from one another and kind of so starved for contact and commiseration and community. Look at how I did that. 3 C words all in a row.
There you go.
Kind of proud of myself, but
Beautifully done.
yeah, but that is like, that's where I think this is coming from. No, at least in part.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that was, I started writing this in 2015, 2016, so far, far before the pandemic. But the cuddling aspect definitely grew in its place in the book. It was sort of like a subplot and then, became a central way for Kathleen to think about connection and intimacy and her relationships with people. And so as it was building and beefing up, absolutely that overlapped with the pandemic and that really dire part of the pandemic when we were just, bumping elbows and giving each other like 10 feet of space when you pass each other in the street. And yeah, I think we all felt that lack of touch and what it does. Dr. Tiffany Field, she's a touch researcher at the University of Miami, calls it skin hunger, touch hunger, and it's a really real thing. And as sort of research for the book, also I did a lot of reading cog-sci papers, neuroscience papers, but also just social science papers about how touch is essential for your biological or your physical health, your emotional health, to a degree where if you don't get enough touch, you die sooner or you're more susceptible to illness or anxiety or depression. Infants at a certain stage in their life, if you don't get enough touch, you're not developing at the rate that you should be. So it makes a huge difference, but it's very much discounted, I think, in healthcare in general. It's sort of like, it used to be a big part of healthcare. Touch was like integral to that for doctors and nurses and therapists, but we've evolved to making it very taboo. And you really only get touch, I think, from like a family aspect, if you're lucky to have that in your family, or in a sexual context. So if those things aren't happening in your life, then you're really isolated, and there's not a lot of avenues to get touch, which is what leads people to find these professional cuddlers.
Right. Yeah, it's making me think of Bob Hope, of all people, the old comedian of yore. He lived to be 100, I want to say, or like into his 100s, and he was a centenarian. And he was obviously this wealthy Hollywood guy. He got a massage every day. And I don't know why I know that. I like read about it in some Hollywood. You know how you read about this stuff.
That's how he lived to be 100.
That's what I'm saying. I was like it stuck with me because I was like, you know what? If you could afford that, because it's like what, $150 a day you're burning on massages. But if you're flush and you can have somebody come in and you're in your 90s, give you a massage every day, it's probably good for you. Like who wouldn't benefit? Who wouldn't benefit from having a massage every day?
Yeah, scientifically proven to be good for you and linked to just like well-being across the board and longevity.
All right. Sold. I'm going to have to start doing that. I have to work that into my budget, my day.
Yeah, you can be like, science says I need to get a daily massage.
When you talk about cuddling, you're obviously, maybe there's a little bit of massage to it, I think. It sort of depends. But it's mostly just like static cuddling in different positions. And one of the charming things in this book as a recurring motif are these different like cuddle positions that are defined, which I imagine as a cuddler you might be privy to. They might actually teach you these things so that you can cuddle with people in different ways. Is that right?
Not really, because Midas touch, there's no actual like analog for Midas touch in the real world that I really know of.
Midas Touch being the name of the cuddle company in the book.
Yes, I made up a startup called Midas Touch, and it sort of operates in this like gig economy way where you're linked with clients through an app, and you go to a physical location and you go to a designated room and you cuddle them for a designated amount of time. But in the real world, and I started cuddling, over the past year and a half, to get into Kathleen's head, no such level of regulation exists. I'm using a site called cuddlecomfort.com, which is maybe a step above Craigslist in terms of sketchiness, where it's just someone messages you and you're totally, you're on your own in terms of setting up what are the parameters, where are you meeting, how long are you cuddling for, and, there's like very loose, structures in place. Like you can kind of see they have star ratings, but like what does that really tell you? So in the world of the book, Midas Touch does have like a Midas method, and it kind of suggests these different cuddle positions and what they might be good for, sort of like written in this corporate, branded, hygienic way.
You
But
made
yeah,
these up.
I made these up, yes. But they're also, you know what? I reference a real book that exists in PDF form online called the Cuddle Sutra, I believe. And so when I was like stuck for like, I need like other cuddle positions, I would kind of like look to there for inspiration.
Wow. So where are you meeting people to cuddle if it's all sort of like off the books and, there's an app? I mean, that seems crazy to me. You could get some weirdo. You're not going to cuddle with somebody in your own house or your own apartment, are you? Or
I
maybe
did
you
that
are.
once. I mean, yeah, it's hard. So there are people who can host, meaning like if you're a cuddler, then you're inviting people into your own home. For the majority of the time, I said I would not host. And I met people, and it's all very touch and go. I will say, as like a preface to all this, that like 99.9% of folks who like messaged requesting a session, like it was like right off the bat, you could tell like this is not someone with like good intentions. The idea is that this is like platonic cuddling, and yes, it's intimate, but it's non-sexual. And
Can I just interrupt?
go
I want to
ahead.
interrupt and just
Yeah.
say that Touch and Go is a good name for a cuddle company. You just said it a minute ago, but I
Oh,
feel
I should have thought of that.
yeah.
The sequel to Holding Pattern, Touch and Go.
So okay, so somebody messages you, you decide to take them on as a client. You meet them typically where at their house or something, or their
So
apartment, or do you?
yeah, if it's available and like within a reasonable distance, there are people who are like, I can call you a car out to like Long Island, and I'm like, I'm not doing that. So yeah, so if it's close, I'll travel to their home. I've done it in public places like a park, um, hotel room.
Wow. You
Yeah,
ever feel you ever feel unsafe?
yeah. So I've learned, again, and there are people out there who've been doing this way longer than I have and can probably speak to best practices better. And I did reach out to a couple people in the beginning to be like, can you help me with this? And they were very generous. But I did learn to do a lot of just like pre-work framing. So, simple things like, did you read my profile and like follow all the steps? Like, can you follow directions and be respectful of that? Let's have a FaceTime, and then I get a little bit more flavor of who they are and why they're looking for this, and can I trust you? Are you a normal person? Um, things like that. And then I learned also at the beginning of the session to like really do, consent framing, just reiterating like no touching of like swimsuit areas. Sometimes it's good to practice saying no. So we'll do an exercise where like I'll ask, can I touch your arm? And they'll say no. And that's just like to get you into like the practice of saying no. And sometimes it feels awkward or like you're shutting someone down. But that just gets you more comfortable and like able to really hold your boundaries. I'll start with like breathing exercises or like box breathing. That's when you're like
What's
breathing in for
box breathing?
you're like breathing in for 4 counts, holding it in for 4 counts, breathing it out for 4 counts, and holding it empty for 4 counts. And it
All
just
right.
makes you like, I don't know, more embodied, more present, relaxed, and we'll like, sort of like make eye contact and hold hands while we do that. So little things like that can kind of just like ease in and take away some of the nerves and also like my feeling of like, am I going to be murdered? But also, I say this to people too, like, it seems preposterous, but like it's not so different from like going on a date with someone and then like having a potential like one night stand, um, which is like what people do very often. And you're not, I mean, you're cognizant of your safety there too, and that's a whole different conversation. But it's like not so different from like what an average femme would be experiencing if they were dating. Like anybody might kill you.
Well, they just found this guy out on Long Island today. Did you hear about this?
No, no.
Some serial killer. This Glio B. I never even heard of it, but there's a guy who killed all these sex workers over the past like 20 years. There were like 10 sex workers in Jersey and Long Island and New York City that disappeared. turned out it was an architect who had like an office in Manhattan.
Whoa.
And yeah, he grew up on Long Island. I mean, just broke. I'd never heard of this before, but
I did not
there
know
are,
that.
yeah, there are weirdos
Terrifying.
out there. Totally.
Yes.
But, you ever have, like, do you carry like a taser or like pepper spray or anything to defend yourself with? You just go in,
Let's
chill.
go in. I should. There was a moment someone brought me empanadas that he had made, and which was so sweet, and I took a bite of one. He was like, "Oh, you should have it while it's warm." And then I took a bite of it and immediately was like, "Oh my God, I'm such an idiot. Like, what if this were drugged?" I mean, thank goodness it wasn't. It was just fine. He was just being actual very nice. But yeah, things like that you have to definitely think about and be on guard for. And I'll tell people before, like, I'm doing this. If you don't hear from me in like an hour, you should call.
Here.
You should call. This is my location, and you should, be concerned.
Yeah, the Cuddle Patrol. But there are in the novel, I mean, there's one relationship in particular which becomes complicated, more nuanced, more human than the typical, transactional cuddle kind of thing. And there are, I think, moments for Kathleen where there is something like unexpectedly moving about it. I can imagine how that would be the case. Especially if somebody's grieving or they're just desperately lonely and they're not there to be pervy or weird. They really just need some human contact.
Yes.
And to be able to give that to somebody. And maybe there are instances or days. I mean, this is this can be even mood related. You don't have to be in some huge rut or like in some, existential state of loneliness to need this. It could just be like a day where like you could use a hug, like. So I can imagine being the cuddler where you would go in there and you yourself would feel like you're getting something from it that's medicinal. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, the same, benefits and chemicals and, biological processes that's happening for someone who's being cuddled, like that also happens for the cuddler. And I absolutely do feel, after a session, like kind of renewed and rejuvenated. And there's then the added layer of if it feels like someone who's really isolated and just doesn't have anyone in their life they could get a hug from, like being able to provide that is really beautiful. And, you have to acknowledge like this is like a very vulnerable place to be in. And I think it's very brave of them to admit, like, I need this and I'm going to, find it, even if it's fairly unconventional. Some of them don't tell anyone about it, so there's like an element of shame, but I really commend them for going out on a limb like that.
It's got to be hard to be like, listen, guys, I'm sorry, I'm going to be late. I'm going to get cuddled. I mean, it's not something that's easy to share.
Right?
And what about like hygiene though? Because like what you might get somebody who's just, do they smell? Like this is where my head goes. I'm like, these people, like, do you have to have like a conversation? Like, please make sure you're not,
that is part of the
from
conversation. I try to put it in, in our like FaceTime before where we're sort of setting like ground rules. I'll say, please be freshly showered and clean clothes and,
Okay.
I'll brush your teeth, all those things, just so everyone's comfortable.
Yeah. Yes. I'm glad. I'm glad to hear that because I could imagine how it could be uncomfortable if that were not the case. And the other thing I was thinking about is like, what about, and this kind of is what Kathleen, I mean, to some extent, but like, what if you get somebody who you think is like really attractive? Does that ever happen? Does that ever happen where you're like, whoa, like some dreamy guy or girl and you're like suddenly cuddling with them? Like that's gotta be odd.
That's not happened to me where I've been like, wow, I'm so attracted to this person. But I will say, to go back to your, you brought up that Kathleen in the book sort of has this more complicated relationship with one of her cuddle clients. And this idea of like authenticity, I think that starts to bubble up between them of like, what is really going on? Because like, the context of how they see each other is so commodified. It's very transactional. But what they're doing is so intimate and so human and almost animalistic, like this very basic need that you're meeting and providing. So like, how do you square those? And I would say in, me setting out to do this myself, I had this preconceived notion of like, it's going to be very much divided. Like it's going to be, I'm platonically cuddling. There's not going to be anything more than that. It's just a service. That's it. And then as I've like gotten more into it, and there have been moments of like, oh, that like feels pleasurable. Like that's almost like could be like bordering on the realm of sexual, because you might be like caressing and again, your bodies are just pressed together and you're like stroking someone's arm. Like that happens, but it's also, you don't have to act on it, and then it just passes. And like, why do we have to rip that out of our bodily sensations? Or why do you have to like divorce that? Like, why do we have to condemn that so much? Like if it's something that you're physiologically responding to, you don't actually have to like put a morality assignment to it. It could just be a thing that happened, and then it's gone. And so you can have like pleasure and intimacy and genuine connection. And so I'm really starting to question, authenticity of relationships in my entire life, because there's going to be some sort of element of transaction in most of your relationships, whether it's like a power dynamic or a friend you want something from, or someone has clout. Like that's true of all our relationships.
Yeah. I'm thinking of like, did guys ever get aroused and you're like, I mean, like, does it get weird?
Yeah. Like? I mean, it happens a lot less than you would be fearful of. And you sort of just like, change positions. You just kind of like let things air out.
Yeah.
But and I've heard of other cuddlers who've said like, oh, especially like younger men will like be very respectful, and they'll like put a pillow in between you or something.
Yeah. Well, that's nice.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah.
It's this book, it's kind of critiquing the commodification, as you just said, of like intimacy. It's an odd thing to commodify. Mm-hmm. And more broadly speaking, this book, I think, and Kathleen might even say this in the book, or you said it in an essay. I always mix it up, when I'm talking with an author who's like written a book and written essays sort of related to the book. I'm like, I don't know which one it was, but makes you think about the commodification of healthcare, period. Mm-hmm. And this is something that has occurred to me across, in a variety of contexts, perhaps most often in the context of mental health care. Mm-hmm. I bristle so much at this notion that you have to pay for a psychiatrist out of pocket. And often the good ones don't take health insurance anymore. They have enough of a clientele and they have enough of a success like record of, good track record that they're just like, you know what, I'm done with Blue Cross. If you want to come see me, I will help you and I will do a good job of it, but it's going to cost you $250 a session or whatever it is they're charging. Mm-hmm. And that, like, I don't begrudge people making a living. I know that they've got to pay the rent too, but it just seems weird to me to be like, man, somebody's in dire straits. They could be on the brink. And you're like, you want me to care? You want me to care about it and help you? $250 a session, twice a week. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, man, there's got to be a better way. This should be something that we just have health insurance for. Like,
right?
In a saner society. It's not that they don't get paid. It's just that they don't get paid like, by the individual. I hate this idea that you have to pay somebody to care about you, especially when you're at your lowest point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel very similarly of healthcare across the board. In the States, you see, this is not a new conversation, but you see other countries, with universal healthcare and it being free and affordable and accessible. And here, I think we've all heard those horror stories of like, oh, if I didn't have insurance, this like very routine surgery would have been like tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it would have financially ruined me. And that's someone with the, the comfort and privilege of having health insurance. There are so many people who don't and just have to suffer through it or suffer the consequences. And that's healthcare in, physical healthcare, but also, mental health care, which again, still is I think we've come a long way, but it's still very much stigmatized and isn't seen as like as essential, even though it's literally tearing apart our social fabric. Um, yeah, and so it's just so inaccessible, and the only ways to do it have been these like weird apps, I feel like, that sort of like, again, commodify. You talk about
BetterHelp.
why, exactly, I'm talking about BetterHelp, where, telehealth, all these little like band-aids that have popped up, and they're like trying to solve a real problem, but maybe also creating this other problem of like creating the illusion that an app can solve a larger systemic problem as huge as like healthcare. But yeah, I don't know if it's here, but in New York, there's also things like TIA, which is like a health clinic for women. And it's kind of looks like Midas Touch, the way I've described Midas Touch. Like it's very like that same aesthetic. It kind of looks like a startup office with like archways and a certain like earthy palette of colors and like wood. So there's Tia, and then there's Tend, which is like a dentist office that's sort of branded the same way. And all of them are like, yeah, we're easy and we're more accessible, especially if you don't have insurance, I think. But yeah, there you see all the ways in which like the failures of the system have sort of like forced these weird commodified stopgaps.
There needs to be a therapy session where you're doing talk therapy while being cuddled. You could combine these things, right?
Yeah.
You have a cuddler happening, somebody's talking to you.
Yeah.
Then you go to the next room and somebody feeds you psychedelics, which is also a part of this now. Like there's all this
Yes.
integration. I mean, there are things happening in Los Angeles, as I'm sure you can imagine, and I know this. It probably started in the Bay, up in Oakland and San Francisco, maybe even before L.A. But there are so many things happening out in Malibu and the Hollywood Hills where people are taking ayahuasca with their therapist, and they're in a circle and they're all staying up all night, puking into buckets and like trying to work shit out. I mean, you're just like this, but this is where we're at. This is how desperate I think people are for some relief, and to have maybe a sense of greater connectivity, and to try to work through shit and maybe accelerate healing. I understand it. I'm a little bit skeptical in terms of its effectiveness. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't want to denigrate. I think it's great if people are doing it safely and trying things out. But I think like in the long-term sense, because I have done some of that, I'm like, I don't know if there's really a shortcut. Maybe it can be an accelerant, but I don't know if there are shortcuts to wellness. And I think that's what people are so often so hungry for. Like you see it when it comes, I think, to psychedelics and psychotherapy. Maybe together, especially together, maybe. If you're doing talk therapy and psychedelics, that combination could maybe lead you to breakthroughs more quickly. But if you're just doing psychedelics, maybe not. But then we see it with like Ozempic, like
Oh yeah.
people taking this. People want a fast forward button, and they want to they just want to take a pill. They don't want to do any work. That's what I think the impulse is. It's like, wow, if I do ayahuasca, I'm going to come out and I'll be the best me possible, and I'll have like spiritual insight, and I will have relieved some of my neuroses and all this kind of stuff. And I just don't know if it works quite that seamlessly. Though maybe I just haven't taken enough.
No, I think there's like absolutely this like focus on optimization and efficiency, but that's what we've taught ourselves. We've like worked ourselves into this like frenzy of everything needs to be frictionless, everything needs to be efficient. I need, the 4-hour work week, like all of that. It's like so much a part of our culture to like do things quickly. But that's not how things work. And that's like, I think what has gotten us into this mess to begin with in, so many parts of our lives.
Yeah. Hearing you say that, it makes me think of another aspect of your book, which is to me, it's very the Bay. I mean, it's American culture, but it's especially the Bay. And you are critiquing like this optimization culture and that sort of tech bro, venture capital, life hacking, biohacking culture that I think, might have its origins there. It's certainly California, it seems like, but maybe the Bay Area. But there is something about that stuff which is both alluring, if I'm being honest, like you and I both have paid enough attention to it to be fluent in it to some degree, right? But it also makes me recoil, and it feels sad. There's a sadness. There's a sadness inside of this self-optimization culture that I don't know if I've ever been able to fully define. But it makes me, and it also makes me a little bit angry. It's like, ugh, this is just gross. Like to constantly be trying to optimize the self and to better oneself. I think I think part of it for me is like, it's all about getting ahead. It's not about actually being happier. It's about getting rich. Like at the bottom, it's about like, I'm going to dominate. I'm going to create a business that I only have to tend to 4 hours a week so that I can travel South America and learn how to do the tango. I mean, I've read the 4-Hour Workweek, so I know.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah, I know what he's selling. And it's alluring. It's like, wow, I'm going to create, I'm going to sell like, how did he do it? He sold like pills, that are like, or supplements, where it's like, I'm going to sell supplements to people who want to optimize, and I'm going to have like a virtual assistant in Bangalore who's going to work while I'm sleeping. And, it's like, then you try to actually do it. And I don't know. I tried to do it for like a minute after I finished the book because you get all wound up. You're like, oh my God, I didn't realize you could do this. And then you try and you're like, this is actually close to impossible to do.
And it's like, to what end? I guess, a lot of it is just like capitalistic, greed, to that end. But also I'm thinking now back to your like ayahuasca example, shortcut to like wellness, if that like the goal there is wellness. I think also what it does too is it just like fractures your identity into this like very discrete thing. Like ayahuasca has such a like a powerful tradition, and it's part of this like much bigger, more complex culture. And then we're just like cherry picking that and being like, okay, I'm going to do this thing and it's going to make me better. But then it like cuts you away from like all the other things that need to be happening in your understanding of yourself and the world, and probably a connection to nature that you're just like totally disregarding. And then you sell it back to people. It's so, And then I think, even like the 4-Hour Workweek thing too, it does that. Like it hyper focuses you on like this one element of being so-called better, but at what cost, right? It probably cuts you off from a lot of good people and good experiences. I mean, I was talking to my friend Al McElroy, who's a writer, about this. They were my interlocutor during one of my events, and we were talking about this fascination of optimizing point A to point B, and they were saying like, we know what point B is. B is death. Like, why are we trying to like hurtle towards it, and sort of like sanitizing all the stuff of life on the way there.
And also trying to beat death. This is just another thing that the tech bros want to optimize. It's like, I'm going to be a centenarian. Like there was just this story running around on social media about this guy. I think he founded Braintree, if I'm remembering it right. He cashed out for like $800 million. So he's got nothing but money and time. He takes like 50 supplements a day, and he claims that he's got his body, which is like he's 47 or something, like that he's as fit as his 18-year-old son. And he eats all of his meals by 11 a.m. He has dinner at 11 a.m. No. Do you know what I'm saying? And it's like, I just want to throw my phone across the room, like just shatter a window. It's like, these people are miserable, are they not? And it's a certain kind of person who's like, I call them achievement robots. They're like really good at achieving and getting and doing, and and like, it's never enough. It's like, it's never enough. And I think they think it's making, I think the idea is like you're going to inspire others to like reach for the stars or whatever, makes me anxious. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, I don't have that feeling. I see this and I'm just like, something ain't right. And there's nothing wrong with taking good care of yourself. Like it's good to take care of yourself and to try to be healthy and stay active into your older age. Like I'm all for that, but like the extremes of it. I guess maybe we need people to be these sort of lab rats to try to figure out what works, but it just seems like it's often dudes. Right? It's usually dudes. Well, I don't know if I've ever seen a woman who's like, I mean, maybe for different reasons or something, but like self-optimization and like seems to be a very like guy thing. Like I'm reading Seneca, I'm a Stoic, and like it's like, oh God,
it
just
it's kind of terrifying.
And you must have seen a lot of that in the Bay, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's also like all these experiments with like anti-aging technology happening. And actually, I'm working on a new manuscript, and it's about these AI-enabled clones who live in a model home, but they're essentially, bred to be like lab rats for anti-aging technology. So they're like, they've been like sort of like biotechnically enhanced, and they've used like CRISPR gene editing to like make them super healthy, and it's all so like billionaires at some point can like use that technology and extend themselves. So it's happening, and it's terrifying. I think it's very divorced from the natural order of things, and maybe like the cynic in me is like, I know we're not going to get that far in this experiment because our environment is collapsing. So
Right.
it's like kind of like, okay, we're gonna, dart our way to the very end, to the fiery end.
I guess so. I mean, I see these pictures. There's this picture online of Mark Zuckerberg. He's like doing like Brazilian jiu-jitsu practice or whatever it is. It's some sort of fighting. Like maybe it's
Oh yeah, he's
MMA.
getting ready for his cage fight with Elon Musk.
And he's like sort of ripped. He's
Yeah.
like he's gotten like really fit. And then like Jeff Bezos, it looks like a Marvel Comics villain now. He used to be like a schlubby nerd in his garage. Do you know what I'm saying? It's like there's something
It's toxic.
deeply weird. Yeah, it's weird. And your book speaks to it. And I think it's not speaking to it in a direct way. It's just, I think it's more like Kathleen is reacting to these forces that are all around her in her environment in the Bay Area. And it's just sort of in the air, like not just there, but maybe especially there because of the number of people and the fact that it's just kind of like, it's like a self-experimentation zone, sort of like Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that what this book is a lot about too is about identity, her trying to sort herself out, which I think I've kind of touched on a little bit. But one of the things that I want to mention about this book in terms of its plotting, which I think is really a shrewd choice creatively and kind of a good, almost like a rom-com setup. I mean, this is not a romantic comedy, but it does have some comedic bent to it, is just the fact that we have Kathleen and then her mother, Marissa, and her mother is about to get married.
Mm-hmm.
She's in her 50s. She's like working out, for her wedding. She's getting super fit. Kathleen is at a sort of like crossroads in her young life. Her boyfriend has dumped her. She doesn't know what she wants. Does she go back to graduate school? And then she's got to sit there and basically be her mother's maid of honor. I mean, she does have to be her mother's maid of honor and sort of plan a bachelorette party and do all this stuff. That's a setup that I have not seen. That was like that. I feel like that's a good setup. Like mom is getting remarried. Yeah, mom is getting remarried, and daughter in her 20s is like, what the fuck do I do with my life? And so like, I don't know. That's kind of the driver of the narrative, and I think I admire it because I'm like, oh yeah, that's good because there's a time frame. There are different kind of ceremonial steps that go along with putting a wedding together, like the bachelorette party and going out and looking at bridal dresses, like sort of like a built-in plot in a way, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly how I was thinking of it. I thought, it's another manifestation of how Kathleen has felt like she's always had to be the caretaker and like sort of the adult in the relationship. And she thinks, my life's falling apart. I'll at least get to go home and my mom will take care of me. And like, that's not so. Like her mom is, this Silicon Valley-fied bridezilla. She's not really a bridezilla, but she has to be
bridezilla adjacent. I mean,
bridezilla
somewhere in
adjacent. Yeah, and it's very fun to play with the wedding trope and have it be a little bit inverted, but also have the scaffolding of like, okay, I've never planned a wedding, but I went to marthastewart.com. I was like, okay, what are the steps in this timeline? And I kind of just picked, okay, that could be a really interesting scene. So you already have this like very intense, high stakes scaffolding in place, and then you can just like throw the characters in there and have them sort things out through the guise of sorting out this wedding.
So, I mean, I don't want to spoil it, but it does. I do feel like Kathleen comes to some conclusions about intimacy and how she wants to be in the world and how she wants to relate to people that I found to be like there's some wisdom to it, like maybe hard won, you know. She's got to go through the she's got to be sort of adrift for a while, cuddling people and hanging out with her friends who, like, you know, what are they have a rat that's like an animal influencer. You know, that's another layer of complication. I mean, there are different subplots, but she's got friends. One, like, her ex-boyfriend is now dating her best friend. It's cool. This is like going back to like high school and college and stuff, but it definitely adds some psychological complication to her situation.
Right. It's like, it's cool, but is it really cool?
It's a little weird, you know? It's got to be a little weird. And especially if you're the person who's just gotten dumped and you're sort of like single and not knowing what to do, and then you're seeing your ex with your best friend and they're super happy, then it's going to be emotionally complicated.
It's charged, yeah.
Yeah. So there's all of that happening. And I commend you. You were named a 5 under 35. Is that right? A 5 under 35? Honoree? Like, how does that even happen?
It was such a surprise. I don't know, really. I just got a call one day. I was at a cafe, I think, you know, working on something or other, and I never pick up calls I don't know, but I picked this one up because I was expecting groceries, a grocery delivery. I was like, oh, maybe my grocery person is here. But no, it was Ruth Dickey, the executive director of the National Book Foundation, and she told me this was happening, and I found that Kirsten Valdez Quaid had selected it, which was a huge honor. Also, 'cause I so admire her, and it was just incredible. Just didn't think that. Knew of it, you know, like thought, wow, that'd be so cool if that happened, right. But like really didn't see it in the realm of possibility. So that's been incredible.
Well, good for you. And you said earlier you're working on a book about the Irvine Company, but you're also working on a book about AI. Are those the same book?
Yeah. So in this world, the Irvine Company has sort of expanded. It's like this very expansive company that, you know, is a little bit like Amazon in the way that it, like, you know, they've taken over grocery stores to web hosting and all of that. So the Irvine Company in this book is a development company that also has, you know, subsumed like a technology company that works in biotechnology. So they are the like sort of parent company of this company that makes these models. I'm calling them models because they live in a model home, and part of their assignment is also to sell these model homes in this tract of land that Irvine Company owns.
What's the company called in the book? Is it called the Irvine Company, or it's called something else?
It's called Jiaxiang Company, which translates to like sweet home.
Okay. Creepy.
So creepy.
How far along are you with this book?
Oh, it's so early. It's like less than 10,000 words.
Oh, okay. So early stages.
Early stages.
Well, I think I mean, as a premise, I'm all in. I think that sounds fantastic. And I hope you can work just for, you know, if for no other reason than just to delight me, if you could work the Irvine spectrum into the plot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be a fun Easter egg. I'm sure there's a way. Yeah.
Well, I love talking with you. Thank you so much for making the time. Congratulations on Holding Pattern. Best of luck on, we'll call it the Irvine Company book.
Thank you so much, Brad. This has been so amazing.